The first of our speakers is Dr. Karl James, who is the Head of Military History at the Australian War Memorial. And I'm particularly interested to hear his presentation this morning because last Thursday I gave a presentation to a U3A group on exactly the same subject, but I'm desperately hoping that we're not going to be inconsistent.
Super awkward. I'm the guest.
You're the expert. Karl's had an eminent academic career and focusing on those areas that we're about to look at. So I'd like you to welcome Dr. Karl James and listen to all that he has to say.
Hello, thank you everyone. Thank you for inviting me back to here. It's a great event. And thank you to the conveners. It's wonderful to have a military history conference. We get so many fantastic people together in the same room. I was supposed to be dead in 1945. I got hit by a bullet and I came back. I'm still going, battling on a bit, but I'm still here. So stated Sandy Matheson during an oral history interview in 2003. Try it now. Hey, there we go. Sandy has a red ring around his head. 58 years earlier, Matheson had been a 24-year-old sergeant serving in the 58th 59th Australian Infantry Battalion in southern Bougainville. Before the war, a carpenter from Trenton, Victoria, Matheson was called up for the army in 1941. He fought with the 58th 59th Battalion during his campaign in New Guinea in 1943-44, where he was wounded and awarded a military medal. On the 24th of April 1945, Matheson was a platoon sergeant of 7 Platoon, A Company. That morning, a patrol had been ambushed by the Japanese at a creek crossing, wounding an Australian. Calling down artillery fire to suppress the Japanese, 7 Platoon attacked the entrenched enemy positions, a series of timbered pillboxes. Within minutes, however, the platoon commander was wounded, and the Lance Corporal, who, in attempting to throw a grenade, was mortally wounded, hit in the stomach. Matheson broke cover to recover the dying man, but was shot in the face, through his nose, and the ball came out into the roof of his mouth. It was like getting hit by a train, he said later. Bleeding, his head fuzzy, and having lost his sense of direction, Matheson made his way back to the Australian lines and was evacuated. He was in hospital in Torquay the next day. Bougainville was a pretty hairy place, Matheson later reflected. A bloody prick of a place. Now, as David mentioned or discussed this morning, by 1945, Australia had been marginalised from the key Allied offensive to defeat Japan and was instead relegated to mopping up operations in Australia's mandated territories in New Guinea and Bougainville, and was fighting on Borneo. Now, the necessity of these campaigns was discussed at the time very vigorously in the Australian press and the Parliament, and by the soldiers themselves. No satisfactory military explanation for these operations has ever been given, perhaps because they were inspired more by obscure political motives than by military ones, wrote Russell Matthews, the 58th and 59th Battalion's adjutant, and later on unit historian. The campaigns the Australians undertook were thus singularly futile. Every man knew, as well as I knew, wrote Brigadier Head K. Tackhammer, commander of the 15th Infantry Brigade, that the operations were mopping up and that they were not vital to the winning of the war. But, he told his battalion commanders, to dismiss any misgivings from their minds and to get on with the job. Now, in the decades since, the campaigns have been labelled as unnecessary, with Australian forces accused of bludgeoning. Australia's war ended in an anticlimactic way, one historians argue, fighting in backwaters for purposes that could hardly be described as heroic. More recently, Bougainville has been described as scandalously under-resourced, although somewhat bizarrely, The same author also stated that the campaign ended in May, with the Japanese left to starve in the jungle. Now, the Bougainville campaign was one of the largest campaigns fought by Australian forces during the Second World War. More than 30,000 Australians served in the island, and over 500 died. Although controversial, offensive action on Bougainville was justifiable. It fulfilled the Australian government's long-standing policies of maintaining an active military effort and employing Australian forces in Australian territory. Crucially, the Australians also mistakenly believed that they outnumbered the Japanese 17th Army, which was estimated to be only 13,500 soldiers. In fact, some 40,000 Japanese Army and Navy personnel occupied the islands and the surrounding, or occupied Bougainville and the surrounding islands. In late 1944, Lieutenant General Stanley Savage's 2nd Australian Corps, the 3rd Division and the 11th and 23rd Brigades relieved the American garrison at Torquay on Bougainville's west coast, where there's a red ring around Torquay. And the New Zealand and Australian Air Force squadrons supported the ground campaign. Savage divided Bougainville into 3 areas ranging from Torquay, central, northern and southern sectors. In the central sector, the line across the cuts across the middle of the island, that was the central sector. The Australian troops followed the Numanuma Trail across the island's mountainous spine to the east coast. In the northern sector, the Australian roughly followed the coastline on the northwest coast of Bougainville, heading towards Bucca. That advance went very well until the disastrous amphibious landing at Portland Plantation, which was the only Australian defeat of the campaign. The main fight, though, was in the southern sector, where the 3rd Division, so the 7th, 15th and 29th Brigades, advanced towards Buin, the main Japanese base on the island. So therefore on the southern, southwest coast, where most of those features are marked on the map. In March and April 1945, the Japanese counterattacked, but were defeated with heavy losses on the banks of the Puritai River and the Battle of Slater's Knoll. The Australians continued the advance against stubborn and skillful Japanese resistance until virtually the end of the war. Fifteen Australian. Yep. 15 Australian infantry battalions served in Bougainville with elements of the Papuan and the 1st New Guinea Infantry Battalion. Now, any of these units could be examined in a close study, but this morning I will be focusing on the 58th 59th Battalion. It, along with the 24th and the 57th and 60th Battalions, were part of the 15th Brigade, which was a militia formation. The 58th 59th Battalion's experiences of jungle warfare were shared by many during the campaign. Rain, sweat, mud, stress, fear and constant patrolling. Such was the experiences of an Australian infantryman on Bougainville. Formed in 1942 with the merging of the militia's 58th and 59th Battalions, the Victorian unit saw extensive service in New Guinea, with the 15th Brigade fighting in the Salamala campaign and in the Rumu Valley, Finisterre Ranges in 1943 and 1944. The battalion that was once described as poor as piss was forged into an experienced combat unit through the formidable leadership of Brigadier Hammer and Lieutenant General George Wharf. Not surprisingly, veterans challenged such criticism. All Australian troops had to learn the art of war, an officer later stated defensively. After a brief return to Australia of less than 6 months, the 15th Brigade deployed to Bougainville in late 1944. The 58th 59th Battalion has spent its time on the African tablelands of Queensland, conducting field exercises with compass marching, observation training, range shooting, grenade practice, and rehearsing night manoeuvres. The training program included live fire company attacks with machine guns and mortars, and artillery fire, and a full battalion night attack. When the battalion arrived in Torquay and Bougainville, training continued during the opening weeks and months of 1945, with the focus on infantry, armour and engineer cooperation and even briefly amphibious training. By mid-April 1945, the battalion had a new commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Maybury, and was almost at its war establishment of 801 personnel. The London-born 30-year-old Maybury has served in the Middle East and Greece and in New Guinea, and he would be awarded the DSO for the coming campaign. Now, the battalion had a nucleus of experienced officers and soldiers who provided subunits for the hardcore of seasoned leaders. 25-year-old Lieutenant Lawrence Proby, for example, with the red ring, he'd been called up for the militia in 1940 as a private serving with the 58th Battalion, later commissioned and enlisting in the AIF. On Bob Doobie Ridge in New Guinea, he was wounded in the fight to take Old Vickers position, an action for which he was awarded a military cross. In the coming campaign in the Buin Road, Proby would receive a bar to his MC, awarded for his part in the crossing of the Mumbai River in late June. An acting company commander at the time, he charged the Japanese pillbox frontally, destroying the crew of 4 and capturing a heavy machine gun. He then jumped into the river and rescued 2 wounded men while under fire. Now, while there were still many Victorians serving in the battalion, the officers, non-commissioned officers and soldiers came from every state of Australia. AIF volunteers served alongside the militia conscripts. The battalion's ranks also included mortarmen, machine gunners, pioneers, stretcher bearers, orderlies and drivers. Less than half of the unit were actually riflemen, numbering only 344 soldiers, some 50 men below its establishment of 397. Although almost at full strength, Lieutenant Matthews noted that the position on paper was better than in reality. Many of the reinforcements they had received were lads of 18 or 19 years of age and had only had a few weeks infantry training. The 15th Brigade took over the Australian advance in the southern sector on the 13th of April, and its role being to seize the Hongari and the Hari River line. Now later this was extended to include the Nivo River. The brigade would advance on a 2-battalion front, with 1 battalion moving along the coastal road, which is the pink and purple highlight right here, that's the Buin Road, and then further inland is the Commando Road, which is highlighted in green. And the 58th, 59th Battalion's campaign is, you can follow them on purple. And basically where you have those highlighted lines along the rivers, they're the different fronts or objectives the brigade advanced to. So we advanced on the 2-brigade front and the 2-battalion front, and the 3rd battalion was in reserve and rotated through. So in addition to those 2 main roads, lateral tracks also connected both roads. In the mountains, meanwhile, the Commando Squadron operated on the fringe of the infantry advance. Now, Brigadier Hammer was under no illusion as to the difficulties of his task ahead, telling his men that the Jap still has the will to fight, but little to back up that will. We, though, have artillery, tanks, air force, flamethrowers to support the Fine Brigade, but it is the infantry, with their own weapons, that must destroy the Japanese in the kill. The 58th 59th Battalion led along the Buin Road axis for much of the campaign. Vigorous patrolling was really core to the Australian operations, and it was part of the Australian offensive policy to gain information and deny ground to the Japanese. The 58th 59th Battalion began its campaign in early April, patrolling along the Puritara River area, hunting for Japanese troops, before pushing forward with an intensive patrolling program operating between the Puritara and the Hongari rivers. During the week of the 7th to the 14th of April, for example, it conducted on average 8 patrols a day. And the tempo increased. During April, 194 patrols were carried out. The patrols collected intelligence of the Japanese dispositions, as well as gathering topographical and track information. Patrols reported on the number and the direction of Japanese footprints, the conditions of the bodies of the Japanese troops they found, as well as the type and density of the vegetation along the tracks and signs of any traffic movements along the footpaths. Recording details about waterways was important too, such as the height and width of a riverbanks, the creek depths, and whether or not a creek could be forded by tank or a jeep, with or without engineer support. When passing through country shelled by artillery or bombway aircraft, patrols will also record the accuracy and the type of damage that was done. Maintaining and improving the lines of communication along the Buin Road was also a priority. The battalion soldiers worked with engineers to corduroy jeep tracks, dig drains and clear the jungle. The general approach was to have one platoon from each company working on road construction, with another platoon patrolling, and the remaining platoon defending the company's location and resting. The Japanese response to the Australian moves was to ambush or attack any small patrol and infiltrate the Australian lines. The 58th 59th Battalion described this area of operations as a maze of enemy defensive positions. In a few hours, the Japanese could dig excellent defensive positions or defensive entrenchments with crawl trenches, overhead cover, and prolifically and prodigiously set booby traps along tracks in the jungle. Private David Trist, red ring around his head, recalled a close night contact with the enemy. After a long day's patrol, he was tired and wet. He and another soldier dug their slit trench with the sleeping bay on the company perimeter. The sleeping bay was about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide and 3 feet deep. We cut down some banana plants and used the stems and leaves to cover the mud at the bottom of the sleeping bay. We had stretcher tops, which we rigged up with canes cut from the jungle, and we each had half of a 2-man tent to string over the sleeping bay to keep the rain out. We didn't have blankets, but we lay down in our wet clothes, although we took off our boots, socks and gaiters. Their rifles loaded beside them. Trist had 4 hand grenades in the hole, cut into the hole in the side of his slit trench. He woke in the night to the sound of an explosion. It was pitch black and I could smell the explosives and heard movements and shouts. As I looked over the top of the slit trench, I saw a trail of sparks heading towards me. Mentally marking the spot where the grenade arc had started, I pulled my skull in until after the explosion a few feet away. I then bowled 3 of my own grenades in quick succession. I picked the target area and some yelling and groaning was evidence of my good aim. The next morning, Trist found an unexploded Japanese grenade in his sleeping bay. Nearby were the bodies of 2 Japanese soldiers. By early May, Colonel Maybury was concerned by the growing number of Australian casualties. Reflecting on their operations so far, he issued a 3-page message to be read aloud to the troops, suggesting patrols are moving too quickly and staying too close to the tracks. The Jap is a cunning enemy, Maybury continued. We know that in his ambushes, he digs in and camouflages his diggings and only cuts very slight fields of view. To counter the Japanese tactics, Maybury set new patrol tasks, with patrols not required to move more than 600 yards in an hour. In this way, a 6-hour patrol could cover 4,800 yards, which is just over 4 kilometres in a single day. Now, this slow routine may appear arduous, Maybury acknowledged to his men, but remember, you only patrol 1 day in 3, and by being patient, careful and painstaking, you will definitely avoid unnecessary casualties. The minimum patrol strength was increased to 1 NCO and 8 other ranks. Along with their slower pace, making them stronger, patrols were to move further off of the track and deeper into the jungle. You are the CO's eyes, Maybury reminded his men. On the 11th of May, Maybury implemented a new technique called the mulberry ambush, and that's the plan on the left of the screen, to inflict greater Japanese casualties and capture prisoners. Fighting patrols were sent into enemy territory and chose ambush sites along Japanese tracks. Ambush parties included 14 other ranks, and they were armed with 2 Brent light machine guns, 2 Owen guns, rifles, and each man carried 3 grenades. Only enemy groups fewer than 20 Japanese were engaged. Now by mid-May, the 15th Brigade was preparing for a major offensive to cross the Hungary River. For over a week, 4 RAN-ZAF Corsair fighter bomber squadrons attacked along the axes of the Commando and the Buin roads. The heavy rain flooded rivers and delayed the offensive for several days. Nonetheless, on the 20th and the 21st of May, the 24th and the 58th 59th Battalions, respectively, crossed the Hungary River. The 24th Battalion attacked head-on, while the 58th 59th Battalion made a wide outflanking move, cutting the Buin road east of the river. Meanwhile, the 57th 60th Battalion had begun its push earlier along the Commando road in a diversionary move against the Japanese. The crossing was planned in detail and preparations were well made. Prior to the push, the 58th 59th Battalion patrols had stealthily crossed the river, avoiding contact with the Japanese to gather information and identify potential river crossing points. While the detailed orders for the river crossing operation themselves ran to 6 pages. When the battalion's lead elements moved, each company was supported by a battery of 25-pounder guns, a troop of Matilda tanks, and a section of engineers. They were also supported by the battalion's own mortars and machine guns. The 58th 59th Battalion's outflanking move cracked the Japanese defensive plan. Maybury felt it was the principal action which resulted in the Japanese withdrawing rapidly over a distance of many miles. The Japanese retaliated with artillery fire. The 58th 59th Battalion's company positions were hit with hundreds of shells, killing and wounding soldiers caught above ground. In response, the Australians built weapon pits with overhead cover to reduce casualties, while RAF Boomerang aircraft flew above Japanese territory during the day to direct Australian artillery fire onto the enemy guns. When later reflecting on the kaleidoscope of daily experiences of life at the front line, Lieutenant Matthews felt that any description would need to capture the shadowy pictures of troops moving quietly into their weapon pits just before dawn stand to, the roar of RAN-ZAF Corsairs about breakfast time as they swooped down to shoot up the enemy positions further down the Buin road, the interrogation of an occasional enemy prisoner, the spasmodic shelling both by our guns and the enemy's, the briefing of patrols as men stood idly fingering their weapons and equipment while their tasks were explained to them, the inevitable malarial parade, native carriers bringing up stores and helping to carry wounded to improvised jeep ambulances. They were bumped down the corduroy track to the field ambulance dressing station, some miles in the rear. Matthews, a pre-war accountant, became one of those evacuated wounded. On the 30th of May, an RAN-ZAF Corsairs mistakenly bombed a B Company and strafed the battalion headquarters. Matthews was badly wounded, shot through the knee. 4 others were also wounded and an officer was killed. The battalion mounted 158 patrols in May and 91 in June, ever fighting its way forward. Heavy bombing from aircraft, artillery fire and tank support accompanied each move. An Australian report noted the devastation caused by such firepower. The enemy positions have been completely devastated by air, artillery and mortars, and all defences were smashed. Not one enemy was found alive in the whole area. A prisoner captured later in the day stated that the enemy had been caught in their defences by the airstrikes, and the casualties had been so heavy that the survivors were demoralised, and then on hearing our tanks approach, they abandoned the positions and fled. Having crossed the Hungary River in another large brigade advance, by mid-June, the 58th 59th Battalion had reached the Ogatara River. Thereafter, the battalion became the Brigade Reserve until the 2nd of July, when the 15th Brigade was relieved. With the Australians now on the Mivo River, torrential rain during July again paused the advance. Rivers flooded, the bridges were washed out, and tracks became virtually impassable. The battalion's final patrol action was fought on the 10th of August. During its 3-month campaign, the 58th 59th Battalion conducted more than 440 patrols and advanced some 20 miles, that's 32 kilometres. And in doing so, Colonel Maybury and the battalion have proven to be adaptable and successfully implemented new techniques in response to the enemy's tactics, reducing the Australian casualties. In addition to their successful patrolling work, the battalion had also fought and won set-piece all-arms actions against the entrenched enemy. Now, the battalion had contributed aggressively to the 15th Brigade smashing the Japanese defensive positions between the Hungary and Hari rivers and captured important garden areas, thus denying vital foodstuffs to the Japanese. The 58th and 59th Battalion suffered 45 officers and men killed and 153 wounded. Another 84 were evacuated for sickness, disease and accidents. And it's also possible that some of those evacuated may have been psychological casualties. By the 2nd of July, the battalion's strength had been reduced to 558 officers and other ranks. It had received only 5 reinforcements during the campaign. The battalion killed 165 Japanese, wounded 81, and captured 11 prisoners. Only those Japanese bodies that were buried by the battalion were counted as killed by the battalion. Following the war's end, Colonel Maybury addressed his unit for its final parade prior to demobilisation. He did not debate the necessity of the campaign or justify the offensive. Rather, he considered the 58th and 59th Battalion's actions on Bougainville as part of the Allied cause against the Axis in the struggle for freedom. Why had they fought, he asked? So that the world might be rid of fascism and oppression, and that all men might live in freedom and be permitted to conduct their lives in their own way. Closer to home, he continued, we here in the Southwest Pacific area have been fighting not only for the preservation of Australia and Australian territory, but also for our loved ones, that our mothers, sisters, wives and children might be permitted to live unmolested, free from fear or concentration camps, brutality, rape, starvation and gradual complete obliteration. This is why they had fought. It was why their comrades buried in the Torquay War Cemetery and elsewhere had given their lives. But their sacrifices will have been in vain, Maybury warned, unless we, who have been more fortunate than they and have survived, play our part in building a better world for our children and the dependents of those who gave their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karl.